the year's 1545. High in the Andes Mountains, at an altitude where men struggle to breathe, Spanish conquistadors stand before a discovery that will reshape the world. Before them rises Cerro Rico, the Rich Mountain, a peak so dense with silver ore that legend says you could build a bridge of pure metal from here to Madrid. They don't know it yet, but they've just found the largest silver deposit in human history. Within months, the first ingots flow toward Spanish ports. Within years, treasure fleets carrying millions in silver cross the Atlantic under armed escort. Within decades, Spain commands wealth that makes every other European power look like beggars at a feast. Emperor Charles V sits on a throne that spans continents. The Spanish Empire stretches from the Philippines to Peru, from Mexico to Milan. The sun never sets on Spanish territory. Spanish soldiers march across Europe, defending the Catholic faith against all challengers. Spanish galleons rule the seas. And at the heart of it all, this mountain, this impossible mountain of silver. But here's what nobody understands yet. This discovery won't make Spain the greatest empire in history. It will destroy them. Within 11 years of finding Potosí, Spain will declare bankruptcy, even as silver floods their treasury. Within a century, Spanish prices will skyrocket to 3 times higher than the rest of Europe. Within 150 years, Spain will collapse from the richest empire on earth to an economically broken shadow. This is the story of how unlimited wealth became a death sentence, how an empire drowned in silver, how Spain conquered the Americas and lost everything. To understand how wealth destroyed an empire, we first need to see how that empire seized the wealth. This is the story of Spain's rise to absolute dominance. Spain's path to dominance begins not with silver, but with steel and faith. When Christopher Columbus returns from his first voyage in 1493, he brings back something more valuable than the small amount of gold in his ships. He brings proof that a new world exists. Within 3 decades, Spanish conquistadors carve through the Americas like a blade through silk. Hernán Cortés conquers the Aztec Empire with 600 men. Francisco Pizarro topples the Inca with even fewer. How? Superior weapons, yes. Horses and gunpowder, certainly. But more than that, an absolute conviction that God and gold march together under the Spanish banner. By 1516, young Charles of Habsburg inherits an empire that defies comprehension. At 16 years old, he becomes the most powerful man in Europe, from his Spanish mother, Spain, and the new American territories. From his Austrian father, control of the Holy Roman Empire, Austria, and parts of Germany. From his Burgundian grandfather, the wealthy Netherlands and portions of France. Charles V doesn't just rule an empire, he commands a continental superpower that hasn't been seen since Rome. And he has plans to match that scale. Charles sees himself as the defender of Christendom. When Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation threatens to shatter Catholic Europe, Charles raises armies to crush it. When the Ottoman Empire pushes into Europe from the east, Charles stands as the shield of Christianity. When France challenges Spanish dominance, Charles meets them on battlefield after battlefield. War becomes the constant state of the Spanish Empire. But war costs money, enormous amounts of money. The silver arrives just in time. That 1545 discovery at Potosí transforms everything. Within a decade, the mountain becomes a city. 80,000 people flood to this freezing, oxygen-starved peak. They come seeking fortune. Most find backbreaking labor in tunnels that burrow deep into the mountain's core. The Spanish force indigenous peoples into the mita system, mandatory labor in the mines. Thousands descend into darkness each day. Many never return. The tunnels collapse. Men suffocate. Mercury used to process the ore poisons workers slowly, methodically. But the silver flows. 1,000 tons per year at the peak. Ingots stacked in warehouses, coins minted by the millions. All of it loaded onto galleons for the voyage to Spain. And Charles V spends it all. His brother Ferdinand fights the Ottoman Turks in Hungary and Austria. Charles sends silver. Protestant princes rebel in Germany. Charles hires mercenary armies with American treasure. France invades Italy. Spanish tercios march south. their wages paid in Potosí silver. The Spanish tercio becomes the most feared military formation in Europe. Rows of pikemen surrounded by arquebusiers, disciplined and professional. They defeat the French at Pavia in 1525. They sack Rome itself in 1527. They crush Protestant forces at Mühlberg in 1547. Spain doesn't just win battles, they dominate Europe militarily for generations. Charles V achieves something remarkable. He keeps his vast empire together through sheer force and unlimited funding. Every rebellion crushed, every rival pushed back, every threat contained. In 1556, exhausted from decades of warfare, Charles V abdicates. He splits his empire between his son Philip and his brother Ferdinand. To Philip II goes Spain, the Netherlands, American territories, and parts of Italy. To Philip goes the Silver Mountain. Philip II is not his father. Where Charles was a warrior emperor constantly traveling between battlefields, Philip governs from a desk in El Escorial Palace. He reads reports, studies maps, makes careful calculations. But he shares his father's vision: Spanish military dominance, Catholic supremacy, imperial glory. And he inherits his father's addiction to war. Philip expands the military campaigns. He sends armies to crush a rebellion in the Netherlands, a conflict that will drain Spanish resources for 80 years. He builds a massive fleet to invade England in 1588. He fights the Ottomans in the Mediterranean, winning the spectacular naval victory at Lepanto in 1571. The costs skyrocket. 1.5 million ducats per year on military spending by the 1570s. 70% of all revenue goes to war. The budget never balances. The debts never stop growing. But Philip has the Silver Mountain. Every year the treasure fleets arrive. Every year the mints produce more coins. Every year Spain projects more power across more territory. By 1580, Philip conquers Portugal, adding their empire to his own. Spanish power now stretches across 4 continents. The empire reaches its absolute territorial peak. From Madrid, Philip II commands the first global empire in human history. Unstoppable, unmatched, invincible, or so it seems. At the height of Spanish power, with silver flowing and armies conquering, nobody sees the poison spreading through the empire's veins. The very source of Spain's strength has begun its fatal work. The year's 1580. Philip II stands at a window in El Escorial Palace, looking out over maps that show an empire beyond imagination. Spanish flags fly from Manila to Mexico City, from Lima to Lisbon, from Milan to the Caribbean. This is the moment, the absolute zenith of Spanish power. The Portuguese crown has just fallen into his hands. With it comes Brazil, trading posts in Africa, colonies in India, the spice routes of the East Indies. The Spanish Empire now encircles the globe. A single monarch controls both sides of the world's silver and gold production, both Atlantic and Pacific trade routes. The largest navy ever assembled. The numbers tell a story of dominance that seems eternal. 45,000 tons of silver extracted from Potosí and flowing into Spanish coffers. 300 Spanish warships patrolling the seas. 60,000 professional soldiers in the Army of Flanders alone, the finest fighting force Europe has ever seen. Colonies spanning from California to Chile, from Cuba to the Philippines. No empire in history has controlled this much territory. Not Rome, not Alexander, not Genghis Khan. And unlike those ancient empires, Spain rules in an age of cannon and ocean-going vessels. Their power can project across entire oceans. A rebellion in Peru can be crushed with troops from Spain. A threat in the Mediterranean can be met by fleets from the Americas. The treasure fleets make their annual voyage like clockwork. 200 ships per year carrying millions in silver. Each galleon carries the wealth of kingdoms. Together they fund the machinery of global empire. In 1571, Spanish and Allied forces obliterate the Ottoman fleet at Lepanto. 200 Ottoman ships destroyed. 30,000 Ottoman sailors dead. The Mediterranean becomes a Spanish lake. The Spanish tercios remain undefeated in major engagements. At Gemblours in 1578, they destroy a Dutch rebel army, killing 10,000 men while losing fewer than 100. Their pike and shot formations set the standard every other European army tries to copy. Spanish culture dominates European courts. Spanish fashion, Spanish art, Spanish literature. Cervantes writes Don Quixote. El Greco paints masterpieces. Spanish becomes the language of diplomacy and high culture. The Catholic Church views Spain as its military arm. When the Pope needs heretics confronted, he looks to Madrid. When Protestant England threatens Catholic Europe, Spanish ships prepare for invasion. In Madrid, the Treasury reports are reviewed. Silver imports remain strong. The American mines show no signs of exhaustion. Military victories continue. Rivals stay contained. Everything points to a future of indefinite Spanish dominance. Philip II commissions more ships, raises more armies, plans more campaigns. Why not? The Silver Mountain funds it all. The empire has existed for barely a century, but already seems permanent, unshakable. In the throne room of El Escorial, surrounded by treasures from 4 continents, Philip II commands the greatest concentration of power the world has ever seen. Nothing can stop Spain now. Nothing except Spain itself. But in the same year Philip reaches his peak, something invisible begins to move through the Spanish economy. Prices rise. Merchants notice their silver buys less. Workers find their wages don't stretch as far. The first cracks appear in the foundation. The first signs appear in the markets of Seville. A merchant selling cloth notices something strange in 1556. The same bolt of fabric that cost 4 reales last year now costs 5, then 6. His costs haven't changed. The quality hasn't dropped. But somehow, the price keeps climbing. He's not alone. Across Spain, bakers raise the price of bread. Blacksmiths charge more for horseshoes. Landlords demand higher rents. Every merchant, every craftsman, every shopkeeper watches their prices drift upward like smoke. And nobody understands why. The silver keeps flowing in. Spanish treasure ships unload their cargo in Seville and Cadiz. The coins pile higher each year. Spain has more money than ever before. So why does everything cost more? The answer lies in a principle nobody in 1556 comprehends. When you flood a kingdom with silver but don't increase the actual goods available, prices must rise. More money chasing the same amount of bread, cloth, and iron. It's simple mathematics. But to the Spanish, it feels like a curse. The price revolution hits Spain first and hardest. By 1600, prices in Spain triple compared to 1500. Meanwhile, in France, prices rise by 30%. In England, similar modest increases. The silver enters through Spanish ports, stays in the Spanish economy longest, and inflates Spanish prices fastest. Spanish workers find their wages can't keep up. A soldier's pay might increase slightly, but the cost of food increases faster. A craftsman earns more coins but buys less with them. And then the comparison starts to sting. Spanish merchants notice that goods imported from France or the Netherlands cost less than Spanish-made products. A Spanish wool merchant can't compete with English woolens. Spanish metalwork costs more than French imports. Spanish agriculture becomes expensive compared to grain from the Baltic. The logic becomes inescapable. Why manufacture in Spain when you can buy cheaper abroad? Workshops close. Spanish artisans can't compete. The industries that might have developed, textiles, metalworking, shipbuilding, struggle against foreign competition made artificially cheap by Spain's inflated prices. The silver that should be building Spanish prosperity instead flows right back out. It pays for French goods, English cloth, German weapons, Dutch ships. Spain becomes a middleman in its own wealth. Silver arrives from America, passes through Spanish hands, and settles in the treasuries of Spain's competitors. Meanwhile, Philip II notices his costs escalating. The Army of Flanders requires constant funding. Each year, the wages must increase to match rising prices. Each year, the supply costs climb higher. The budget strains under expenses that grow faster than revenue. In 1557, just 1 year after inheriting the throne, Philip II makes a devastating announcement. Spain declares bankruptcy. The richest empire on earth, with silver mines producing 1,000 tons per year, cannot pay its debts. Philip restructures his loans, delays payments to soldiers and suppliers, renegotiates with bankers. The Spanish army in Flanders mutinies when their wages don't arrive. They sack Antwerp in fury, killing thousands. But the wars can't stop. The empire must be defended. The Catholic faith must be championed. The rivals must be contained. So Philip borrows more. Interest rates climb to 15, then 20%. Bankers know the Spanish crown is desperate. They know the silver is already pledged to previous debts. They charge accordingly. The cycle begins. Borrow to fight wars. Silver arrives, but prices have risen, so it buys less. Need more money, so borrow more. Pay higher interest. Silver buys even less. Borrow more still. By 1560, Philip declares bankruptcy again. The mountain of silver that seemed infinite now seems insufficient. The treasure that promised eternal dominance now barely covers immediate needs. And Spain's rivals are watching carefully. They see the silver flowing through Spanish hands into their own economies. They see Spanish industries collapsing. They see opportunity. The crack has appeared in Spain's foundation. It will only widen from here. While Spain's economy fractures from within, external threats multiply. The empire's enemies sense weakness. The Netherlands erupts in open rebellion. England builds its navy. And Philip II, trapped by pride and faith, can only respond with more war and more spending. The Dutch strike first. In 1568, the Netherlands, Spain's wealthiest European possession, erupts in rebellion. Protestant Dutch nobles refuse to bow to Catholic Spanish rule. They refuse to pay Spanish taxes. They refuse to accept Spanish soldiers occupying their cities. Philip II responds the only way he knows how. He sends the Duke of Alba with 10,000 veteran tercios to crush the rebellion. Alba arrives like a storm. He establishes the Council of Troubles. The Dutch call it the Council of Blood. Thousands are executed. Protestant leaders are hunted down. Spanish soldiers occupy every major city. But the Dutch don't break. They open the dikes, flooding their own farmland to stop Spanish armies. They turn their cities into fortresses. They fight from behind walls, in streets, on frozen canals. Led by William of Orange, they transform rebellion into a war of survival, and it bleeds Spain dry. The Army of Flanders requires constant reinforcement, constant supplies, constant wages. The supply line stretches from Madrid through France or by sea around hostile England. Every convoy costs a fortune. Every siege drains the treasury. Philip pays, month after month, year after year. By 1572, the war has cost millions and achieved nothing. Spanish soldiers control cities but not the countryside. They win battles but not peace. The Dutch adapt, using their knowledge of local terrain, their naval superiority in coastal waters, their ability to sustain rebellion through trade. Then England enters the calculation. Queen Elizabeth. I watch as Spanish struggles with keen interest. She sees opportunity. English privateers, pirates with royal backing, begin raiding Spanish treasure fleets. Francis Drake circumnavigates the globe, plundering Spanish ports along the way. He returns to England with enough stolen Spanish silver to fund the English navy for years. Philip tolerates the raids at first, annoyances, distractions. But when Elizabeth begins openly supporting Dutch rebels with money and troops, Philip's patience ends. He orders the construction of the Great Armada, 130 warships, 30,000 men, the largest invasion fleet ever assembled. Its mission, destroy the English navy, land troops in England, depose Elizabeth, return England to Catholicism. The Spanish fleet gathers in Lisbon through 1587, the finest ships from Spanish and Portuguese yards, soldiers drawn from Spain's best tercios, cannons loaded, provisions stocked, blessed by priests who assure the men that God sails with them. In May 1588, the Armada sets sail. The plan is straightforward. Sail to the Netherlands, pick up additional troops under the Duke of Parma, then cross the Channel to England. Spanish numbers and discipline will overwhelm the smaller English fleet. Spanish soldiers will land and march on London. But nothing goes according to plan. English ships harass the Armada as it moves up the Channel. Faster, more maneuverable vessels dart in and out, firing at range, refusing close combat where Spanish soldiers could board. The English ships carry longer-range cannons. They strike and retreat, strike and retreat. The Spanish fleet reaches Calais and anchors, waiting for Parma's army. The English send in fire ships. 8 vessels loaded with pitch and gunpowder set ablaze, sent drifting into the anchored Spanish fleet in the middle of the night. Panic spreads. Spanish captains cut their anchor cables and scatter to avoid the burning ships. At dawn, the Armada is in disarray. The English attack at Gravelines. Hours of cannon fire, Spanish ships damaged, taking on water, running low on ammunition. The invasion of England becomes impossible. The Duke of Medina Sidonia, commanding the Armada, makes the only decision left: retreat. But they cannot sail back through the Channel with English ships pursuing. The only route home is north around Scotland and Ireland, then south along the Atlantic coast. The storms hit. Atlantic gales batter the damaged fleet. Ships sink in Scottish waters. Others are driven onto Irish rocks. Sailors who make it to shore are killed by locals or die of starvation. Of the 130 ships that left Spain, fewer than 70 return. 15,000 men never come home. The cost? Over 10 million ducats. Nearly 2 years of silver income from the Americas gone. And the war in the Netherlands continues. Through the 1590s, the bleeding doesn't stop. Every year brings new campaigns. Every campaign brings new costs. Spanish tercios still win battles. They remain the finest infantry in Europe, but they can't win the war. In 1596, Philip II declares bankruptcy for the 3rd time. Soldiers riot again. Supply convoys go unpaid. Bankers refuse new loans unless interest rates climb even higher. The war chest empties as fast as silver arrives. Spanish commanders beg for more troops. Philip sends them. They beg for more supplies. Philip borrows to provide them. They beg for more money. Philip has none left. The Spanish treasury takes silver with one hand and pays it out with the other, keeping nothing. France joins the conflict, opening yet another front. Now Spanish armies fight in the Netherlands, defend against France, patrol the Mediterranean against Ottoman raiders, and garrison the Americas against pirates. The empire has become a fortress under siege on every wall simultaneously, and the walls are cracking. By 1598, Philip II dies, exhausted and defeated. His son, Philip III, inherits an empire still vast, still powerful, but financially hollowed out. The silver still flows from Potosí. The treasure fleets still cross the Atlantic. But Spain is losing. Not on battlefields. Spanish soldiers still fight magnificently. Spain is losing in marketplaces, in treasuries, in the slow mathematics of debt that no army can defeat. The wars grind on into the 17th century, but Spain's fate is already sealed. The competitors who absorbed Spanish silver have built something Spain neglected: productive economies that don't depend on mines. Now those economies grow stronger while Spain continues its slow collapse. The 17th century opens with Spain still standing, still fighting, still claiming dominance. But the empire is bleeding out. Philip III inherits debts that dwarf the annual silver income. He inherits wars in the Netherlands that have already consumed 40 years and millions of ducats. He inherits an economy where Spanish-made goods cannot compete with foreign imports. He inherits a system entirely dependent on silver that buys less each year. His response? The same as his father's: borrow more, fight on, hope the silver saves them. It doesn't. In 1607, Spain declares bankruptcy again, the 4th time in 50 years. In 1627, bankruptcy again, the 5th time. The pattern has become predictable. Silver arrives, debts are paid, new debts are incurred, prices rise. Silver buys less, more borrowing becomes necessary. Bankruptcy eventually follows. But now the competitors have surged ahead. The Dutch, those rebels Spain has fought for decades, build a commercial empire that dwarfs Spanish trade. In 1602, they established the Dutch East India Company, the first modern corporation. Dutch merchants trade in spices, silk, and goods across Asia. Dutch banks become the most sophisticated in Europe. Amsterdam replaces Seville as the financial center of the continent. The Dutch use Spanish silver paid to them for goods and services to build ships, establish colonies, and create wealth that reproduces itself through trade and manufacturing. England follows a similar path. English merchants expand into the Americas, India, and the Far East. English factories produce wool, metal goods, and ships. The English economy grows through production, not extraction. By mid-century, England's economic output rivals Spain's despite having no silver mines at all. France, unified under strong central government, develops its industries deliberately. French ministers recognize what Spain missed, that manufacturing creates more lasting wealth than mining. French textiles, French weapons, French luxury goods flow across Europe. All of them are paid with Spanish silver. The silver from Potosí flows through Spain like water through a sieve. It enters Spanish ports and exits immediately to pay for Dutch ships, English cloth, French goods, German mercenaries, Italian bankers. Spain produces less and less, imports more and more. Spanish cities that once thrived on manufacturing decline. Workshops close. Skilled artisans emigrate to France or the Netherlands where wages go further. The population drops as people abandon unproductive regions. By 1640, the disasters multiply faster. Portugal rebels and successfully breaks away, taking Brazil and the African and Asian colonies with them. The Portuguese restoration happens so swiftly that Spanish forces can barely respond. Philip IV sends armies, but they fail to reconquer what was lost. Catalonia revolts. The French support the rebels and invade from the north. Spanish troops fight another war on another front. The Netherlands finally officially gains independence in 1648 after 80 years of warfare. Spain recognizes Dutch sovereignty in the Treaty of Münster. 80 years of fighting, hundreds of millions spent, tens of thousands of soldiers dead. For nothing. The Army of Flanders, once the terror of Europe, mutinies repeatedly through the 1640s. Soldiers go unpaid for months. They loot the territories they're supposed to defend. Discipline collapses. The finest military force in European history disintegrates from lack of funding. In 1647, bankruptcy again, the 6th time. In 1653, bankruptcy again, the 7th time. In 1662, bankruptcy again, the 8th time. 8 bankruptcies in little over a century. 8 times the richest empire on earth admits it cannot pay its debts, despite silver still flowing from American mines. The silver production from Potosí begins declining. The richest veins have been mined out. The remaining ore requires more labor and expense to extract. By 1650, output has dropped to half of peak levels. But the decline of the mines merely confirms what has already happened. Spain has collapsed economically regardless of silver production. French armies defeat Spanish forces at Rocroi in 1643, shattering the myth of Spanish invincibility. The Spanish tercios, undefeated for over a century, break under French artillery and cavalry. The era of Spanish military dominance ends on that battlefield. By 1650, Spain is no longer a major power. The empire still exists on maps. Spanish colonies remain in the Americas. The king in Madrid still claims vast territories. But Spain has become irrelevant in European affairs. Spanish armies no longer determine outcomes. Spanish money no longer funds continental politics. Spanish influence has evaporated. A century and a half after discovering the richest silver deposit in history, Spain is poorer than it was before. The mountain of silver that promised infinite power delivered only debt, inflation, and decline. Spain didn't fall to a stronger empire. No foreign army sacked Madrid. No invasion destroyed the kingdom. Spain defeated itself. The silver killed them. When the dust settles and historians count the cost, the question remains: how did unlimited wealth produce total failure? The answer lies not in bad luck or poor leadership, but in economic forces Spain never understood and couldn't control. The Spanish Empire limps into the 18th century as a shadow. The treasure fleets still sail, but carry a fraction of former wealth. The colonies remain, but contribute less each year. The king still sits in Madrid, but commands no respect in European capitals. Spain becomes what it fought so hard to avoid, a second-rate power watching others shape the world. The Silver Mountain at Potosí still stands, but the city surrounding it has shrunk. Where 80,000 people once lived, now only thousands remain. The tunnels run deep into the earth, honeycombing the mountain with passages where men died by the tens of thousands. The silver that remains is too deep, too difficult, too expensive to extract profitably. The mountain gave Spain everything it had, and Spain spent it all. The numbers tell a brutal story. Over a century and a half, Spain extracted wealth equivalent to billions in modern currency. They controlled the largest empire on earth. They commanded the finest armies. They held more territory than Rome at its peak, and they emerged from it poorer than when they started. By 1700, the Spanish economy is smaller than it was in 1500. The population has declined. The industries have withered. The military is a shell. Spain enters the 18th century as a prize to be fought over by France, England, and Austria, rather than a power that fights for itself. The legacy of Spanish silver lives on, but not in Spain. The silver that flowed through Spanish hands built the economies of Spain's rivals. Dutch banks were capitalized with Spanish silver. English industries were funded with Spanish payments. French power was financed with Spanish gold. The competitors who received Spanish silver used it differently. They invested in manufacturing, in ships, in trade networks, in institutions. They built economies that produced wealth rather than simply extracting it. Spain's failure becomes a lesson that echoes through history. Economists studying the Spanish collapse identify principles that apply far beyond the 16th century. They see how resource wealth can destroy rather than build, how easy money prevents the hard work of developing real productivity, how inflation can devour apparent riches, how debt spirals can trap even the wealthiest nations. The pattern Spain established repeats across centuries. Oil-rich nations in the 20th century face the same trap. Venezuela discovers massive petroleum reserves and grows wealthy, then collapses into poverty as oil prices fall and the economy produces nothing else. Nigeria extracts billions in oil wealth while most citizens remain poor. Saudi Arabia recognizes the danger and attempts to diversify before the oil runs out. The Spanish silver curse has a name in modern economics: the resource curse, or Dutch disease, named ironically after the Netherlands that avoided Spain's fate. Nations blessed with natural resource wealth often develop worse economies than nations with nothing to extract. The easy money prevents development of institutions, industries, and innovations that create lasting prosperity. Spain proved the principle on a grand scale. But the legacy extends beyond economics. Spain's silver financed the Counter-Reformation, spreading Catholicism across the globe. It funded Baroque art and architecture that still defines Spanish culture. It built cities in the Americas that remain major centers today. The Spanish language spread across continents on ships paid for with Potosí silver. The question haunts historians: what if Spain had used the silver differently? What if they had invested in industries instead of armies? What if they had built institutions instead of fighting wars? What if they had recognized that wealth must be created, not just extracted? Spain had every advantage: strategic position, educated population, advanced technology, control of global trade routes, and a mountain of silver to fund development. They had everything needed to dominate not just the 16th century, but centuries beyond. Instead, they chose glory over growth, military prestige over economic development, the defense of faith over the building of prosperity, and they paid the ultimate price. The mountain of silver became a mountain of debt. The treasure that promised power delivered poverty. The wealth that should have built an eternal empire instead purchased a slow collapse. Spain's story stands as history's greatest economic paradox, the proof that having everything can leave you with nothing. In the end, Spain discovered a truth that nations still struggle to understand. Wealth is not what you possess. Wealth is what you create. And Spain created nothing but debt, bought with the mountain of silver that slipped through their fingers like water, leaving behind only the memory of what might have been.